Eclipse was always about having to face the consequences of your choices. Fantasy love and reality love. There isn't one that's better than the other. But I wanted her to really have to look at what she was choosing and what she was giving up and put full weight on both of those choices before she made it.
Meyer's viewpoint on romance is sketchy at best, and after watching some of her interviews, I really have to question where she's coming from. Maybe she has her reasons, but her views on what a healthy romantic relationship even looks like is terribly archaic and, in some ways, dangerous. The webs she weaves throughout the Twilight Saga sound like something you'd find on an angsty incel forum. Let me explain. In part 1, I talked about how stories are fundamentally about change, and I've discussed how one of the primary ways to show change are through character arcs. When a character changes, it should, on some level, resonate with the audience. Even if a reader doesn't agree with a character's change or motivation, they should still understand them, like a villain out for revenge. Failure to do so makes the character strange and confusing.
Wait, dude, your story don't add up. I mean, aren't the rats the ones who scared your parents away? Then, what, Ratman, what's the motivation here?
Maybe a reader can relate to a character's struggle and growth, or maybe a reader can understand a character making a harsh or damaging choice because of their emotional state. Meyer doesn't seem to understand this at all. By her own words, Meyer seems to think that choice in a story, or at least in a romantic partner, is arbitrary. Thus her protagonist comes off as stale and unrelatable.
There isn't one that's better than the other, but I wanted her to really have to look at what she was choosing and what she was giving up.
I think what Meyer meant to say is that there are pros and cons to dating either Jacob or Edward, which is true. Jacob actually shares some chemistry with Bella at times, but he's also prone to violent outbursts. Edward is more supportive and can grant Bella vampiric powers, but he's a creepy, controlling slice of white bread. But there is a third option which thus far hasn't been explored in the series. Being single. One of the worst lessons for young women in this book is the importance of staying with a guy even when you really shouldn't. Bella can't stand the idea of being alone and does whatever she can to jump back into her toxic old relationship as soon as she gets the chance. She literally spent months screaming herself awake from nightmares after Ed left in New Moon. When she heard Ed was in trouble, she fled the country to rush into his arms. When he started getting really controlling, to the point of literally kidnapping Bella so she couldn't see her friend and Ed's kinda sort of romantic rival, she should have realized that maybe something's a little off about this whole picture. However, she never considered leaving Ed despite his overwhelming flaws. He is her perfect man, her soulmate, her destined husband. But why? These two share no chemistry, they have no common hobbies outside of each other, and they spend most of the first half of Eclipse butting heads. Both of them seem to appreciate classic literature to some degree, but that sounds less like a common interest and more like Meyer projecting herself and her personal fantasy into the book. I couldn't tell you what holds these two together outside of something superficial like how they each look. And to anyone who wants to defend this trash, don't tell me it's because they're destined soulmates or whatever. That's presenting an argument but doing nothing to substantiate it. It's lazy writing and makes for a hollow experience. On the other side of the coin is Jacob, who seems to have a lot of the same qualities as Ed outside of actually being dead. He hits all the same points that Bella looks for in a guy. However, unlike Ed, Bella actually seems to have some compatibility with him. She exchanged some lighthearted banter with him in New Moon. They actually shared something of a hobby when they were repairing motorcycles together, and unlike Bella and Edward, which seemed built by love at first sight and nothing else, Bella and Jacob were built on something deeper and more meaningful. There was just one problem.
You want me to put you in the hospital?
Jacob's outbursts never directly threaten Bella, but there's always that possibility that he'll lose control and lash out, just like what Sam did to Emily. Jacob does promise never to hurt Bella, but that promise rings hollow when he throws a wrench in her direction, when he said he'd prefer her dead over being a vampire, and when he forces a kiss against her will. Neither Jacob or Edward make for a great match for Bella. And it gets worse when you consider Meyer's perspective on Jacob's motivation.
Jacob has this twofold mission, and one is to save her from the monster, and the other is to make her see that she loves him, because he knows that she does. He can tell.
When you get into studying a character, sometimes it really helps to ask what the motivation is. It's especially helpful if you can get it straight from the author. However, in this case, Jacob's motivation, combined with his unerring persistence, paints a very dark image. Jacob is fully confident in what he's doing. He knows full well what's good for Bella, and he'll pursue that goal no matter what, even if Bella tells him not to. In Jacob's mind, Bella's just denying her true feelings. She'll finally do the right thing if Jacob is persistent enough and manipulates her the right way. It's fine because the ends justify the means. Jacob is sure he's right and Bella's wrong. Her opinion and thoughts don't matter as far as Jacob is concerned because he knows better. I don't know what it's like to be a woman, but I can understand how frightening it must be if you have a roided up wannabe alpha male who won't take no for an answer, follow you around and insisting that you really don't know what's in your best interest. Sure, he has plenty of moments where he's calm and complimentary, but you only need those one or two darker moments to set off all the alarm bells and take away your sense of safety. Bella's apparent choices for a romantic partner fall between self-interested roid rage monster and the guy who thinks it's okay to put her under house arrest for the weekend whenever he's gone. But hey, you've gotta be with someone! Life's apparently pointless if you're single! It's debatable which is worse. Edward's possessive, controlling abuse, or Jacob's threat of physical abuse, and it's a discussion that I don't have the experience to take a side on other than both options are terrible. And yet, Bella feels compelled to pick one of them. One over the other. The lesser of two evils. That's not how romance is supposed to work. That isn't magical, that's arbitrary. That has the same emotional appeal as picking a commute to work. Presumably, picking Ed would be better since he'll likely calm down and become less controlling after Bella mutates into a vampire, but that sends a terrible, terrible message. Ladies, is your guy a possessive douchebag who won't let you see your friends or even live your life? Just hang in there. It'll get better when you're married and stuck with him.
It's not just a friendship thing between the two of them. She keeps having this urge to take care of him and to go and see him again and to make sure that he's happy without ever realizing what that means.
Meyer's view on these two is perplexing to me. Apparently, if you want to take care of someone or help them when they're feeling down or hang out with them, it's not because you're friends. It's because on some level, you're in love with that person. Playing devil's advocate for a moment, I don't actually think Meyer was trying to imply this. She was just saying that Bella was kind of in love with Jacob, and that's why she wanted to be around him. But consider how Bella treats her human friends. Now, Stewart is not widely known for her potent acting skills, but even with her severe limitations, you can see how little energy Bella reacts with in her ordinary school friends.
It just doesn't need cliches. The speech is gonna be epic.
Ignoring for the moment that the human friends are basically useless to the story at large, they're also empty vessels. These aren't people Bella relies on, confides in, trusts with some deeper secrets, go to for advice, or anything. They're just bland, platonic husks, only there to be there, acting as kind of camouflage for Bella to hide in so other kids will think she's normal.
I'm sorry, I do not know what you are talking about. I am normal.
These friendships look awfully bleak when compared to Bella's romantic relationships. It's almost like because the humans aren't seen as romantic matches, they're not worth focusing on with more than a passing notice. Even Alice gets minimal enthusiasm from Bella, and these two are supposed to be best friends. This might seem overly analytical, but this almost feels like Meyer is saying that anyone who doesn't strike you as a potential match isn't worth any kind of real investment of your time or effort, which isn't helped by all the human friends getting into their own relationships with each other. The only time Bella displays any kind of life or energy in her voice is when she or someone she loves is in danger, or when she's around one of her suitors. Outside of that, if she's talking to her dad, if she's talking to a human, if she's just walking downtown somewhere, she has a flat affect and a monotone voice. Her world just seems like a gray expanse, devoid of any detail. On one hand, this does present the image that Edward is such a welcome beam of light into her life that she never wants to be without him. And yet, there are two main problems with this viewpoint. One is that Jacob never gets the same reaction out of Bella, not to the point where she's as dependent or addicted to him, so he never matches up to Ed as a romantic partner. This interpretation ruins the idea of the love triangle ever being viable. For a love triangle to work as a plot device, both suitors have to have something to offer, and Jacob always falls behind Ed in this regard, at least with respect to how Bella reacts to him. The second problem is that, as I've previously detailed, Ed and Bella's relationship is never defined by anything substantial. At most, there are some references to classic literature like Romeo and Juliet or Wuthering Heights, but that's made superficial since what Meyer uses never has any depth. And that gets to the core of my argument. Through these empty relationships and vapid character models, Meyer's writing style is eerily similar to that of an Incel's. Consider the incel, or involuntary celibate for those who don't speak internet. In their minds, these unfortunate fellows are the victims of society's unfair standards and are rejected by the fairer sex for no good reason. Just forget that these individuals often engage in behavior like using Axe body spray instead of bathing, or staring at women to the point where you're not sure they have eyelids. There are a great many qualities that are attributed to incels, but I want to focus on just two for the moment.
So why would a beautiful woman like you be looking at flats in a neighborhood like that?
One trait is that many incels seem to believe that women naturally owe men sex or attention for the simplest of favors, also known as the nice guy factor.
Exactly what my boyfriend was saying the other day.
Fuck you.
This is behavior that we see in Jacob in all but name. He was nice to Bella, so of course, she owes him a relationship. He gets bent out of shape when she doesn't return his feelings, and he manipulates her to get a little gratification. Another incel trait is treating women like objects or property, and that fits Edward's treatment of his fiancée to a T. In Eclipse, Bella isn't allowed to be independent or make her own choices, at least in the first half of the story. Ed constantly feels like he's one step away from locking her in a dungeon so he can keep her to himself. But it's okay in his mind because he's doing this to protect her, so he gets to ignore her complaints or the larger context of what he's doing to her. And all of that is backed up by the incredibly shallow romantic chemistry in these books. Similar interests don't matter, communication doesn't matter, and supporting each other emotionally doesn't matter. All that matters is the relationship just being there. Meyer wrote a series about the importance of being in a relationship which was so surface level, so absent of personality, and loaded with so much superficiality that Bella and Edward's love for each other can barely be described outside of merely existing. Stephanie Meyer is not an incel, but damn if she doesn't treat relationships in her books like one. And now that I have gotten that overly analytical rant out of the way, how about we get back to the plot?
Starting.
So the big climactic battle is finally here. After an hour and a half of build-up, a good 20-something chapters of the novel, we're finally given a glimpse of maybe something happening within the plot. The Cullen clan are poised in a field using Bella's blood as bait. Sam and the other wolves are lying in wait for an ambush. And Riley's runaways are out in force, hungry for violence. The story has built up this really intense final fight scene, pitting the good guys against a really powerful army of vampires that could still wipe everyone out, even with the wolves helping. And yet, this is one of the weakest climaxes I have ever come across in any story. The climax is broken into two parts, the main fight in the field, and shortly after when Vicky and Riley find Ed and Bella on the mountaintop. The mountain battle is its own mess, but the fight in the field is almost acceptable. Taking everything at face value, the music matches up well, the camera angles show enough, and occasionally some shots actually look kinda cool. But the movie still suffers from a lot of issues. For starters, the choreography in the battle is minimalistic as hell. Most of the vampires use a fighting method I like to call nothing but haymakers. Almost every attack is over the top, like the Cullens are putting all their strength into each hit.
I figured it out. We just need to hit them really, really hard.
This could have been a great way to develop a more unique fighting style for the Cullens with their decades of experience over their opponents. This same concept worked well with every fight scene in the Old Guard. I would have preferred if they used some kind of established martial art that took advantage of their strength. Maybe all the Cullens could have studied karate just in case they needed to fight another vampire. You know, like what happened in the first movie. And again in the second movie. Even though it's rare for the Cullens to have to fight other vampires, wouldn't it still be reasonable to train just in case something did go awry? Like if the Volturi attacked them? Which is something they're all worried about because they haven't turned Bella yet and the Volturi might kill her for breaking their rules or some such nonsense. It's the main reason why the Cullens even bother to get involved with the newborns in the first place.
An army of vampires?
And they've been created to fight someone.
We're the only clan even close to Seattle.
Regardless of why they were made, if we don't put a stop to them, the Volturi will.
Establishing a unique fighting style also breathes a sense of identity into the world. It's something that comic books have been flourishing with for a very long time now. Take Spider-Man, who actually has his own martial art called Way of the Spider, or Spider-Fu as he refers to it. He trained with Shang-Chi, a martial arts superhero, to develop a fighting style that matched his individual abilities. He combined his mastery of aerobics, his spider strength, and eventually he combined all that with his spider sense to become an even stronger hero than before. Training in how to fight would also give the Cullens more of an identity. Every vampire on the field is more or less using the same style, with the Cullens using big swings and some minor acrobatics and wire work, while the newborns rely on really ineffective grappling. The wolves at least have an excuse for not using martial arts since they just have teeth and claws. Their fighting style is fine, but I don't think Taylor Lautner feels the same way I do.
Wow, we're at war. This is gonna be the best. I'm gonna be like, you know, Jet Li in this one. Oh, wait. Whenever I do anything cool or anything action-oriented, I am a wolf.
But that is all leagues better than what the book did, which was skip the battle entirely. In a decision that I find absolutely baffling, the book stayed with Bella's perspective on top of the mountain camping site miles away from the actual fight. The dramatic battle that the book had been building up for its entire runtime, the dangerous conflict that the future hinges on, the decisive moment that could see the Cullen clan exterminated, was little more than a side note in the plot. This really put Meyer's weak writing style on full display when the best she could do was have Seth the Wolf hang around so Ed could read his mind and recap the battle verbally. That's the same as getting hyped for the Super Bowl, then watching it by having someone else describe it while they listen to it on a radio broadcast that you can't hear. Why would you try to raise the stakes like that only to rip the climax away and blue ball your audience? And yes, in the book there is a last-second battle against Vicky and Riley, but after hearing so much about newborns for the last 400 pages, you'd expect to get something at least. I can't imagine in the modern era writing a book like this, building up this big fight scene only for it to be a red herring. Not only do you not get the big fight, but in the book you never even see any of the newborns, with the exceptions of Riley and Bree. This is the exact opposite of Chekhov's gun. Never, ever, ever introduce a plot element this hard if you're never going to pay it off. At least when Tolkien did something similar in The Hobbit, with the Battle of the Five Armies, it was a last-second twist, and Bilbo had little direct involvement in the outcome of the fight, short of getting paid and going home. Not that it would matter much, because the newborns are dreadfully confusing in their own ways. The movie doesn't provide much info about the newborns. They're really strong and difficult to train. That's about it, aside from some simplistic exposition Jasper provided during the sparring scene.
Now, the two most important things to remember are, first, never let them get their arms around you. They'll crush you instantly. And second, never go for the obvious kill.
We also learn that the newborns are stronger than aged vampires because they're full of juicy human blood.
Juice!
They're a great deal stronger than us, because their own human blood lingers in their tissues. Our kind is never more physically powerful than in our first several months of this life.
Apparently, it takes a whole year for their own blood to get used up, which is ridiculous, but I'm willing to let it slide through suspension of disbelief. It also strikes at a weird power imbalance if a regular vampire could reasonably lose to some punk who transformed 5 minutes ago. This is something that's punctuated in Breaking Dawn when Bella beats Emmett in an arm wrestling contest after she mutates. But the movie can only say so much. The book, of course, can go into more detail, which means that there are far more inconsistencies. For one, newborns are supposed to be slaves to their instincts. While explaining how to defeat newborns, Jasper points out, but they are slaves to their instincts, and thus predictable. While the book references this point a handful of times, it never defines or reinforces it. In fact, it does exactly the opposite, especially with what it does when Bella transforms in Breaking Dawn, but that'll be a separate rant for a separate review.
Well done, Bella. I've never seen a newborn show that kind of restraint.
On one hand, newborns are supposed to really thirst for blood, which is fine as far as building lore goes, but you'd think that means they'd be murdering people left and right just to get a quick drink. But we never see that demonstrated. Riley's runaways only kill a few people during the night while hiding out inside a very populated city. They aren't drowning in the blood of their victims, and everything we see of Bree suggests she spent most of her vampire life huddled away in a corner. And remember Rosalie's backstory? Yeah, she got revenge and killed her attackers, but she never gave in and went after their blood. She openly stated that she never drank anybody, which is less than even Edward, who does have a kill count to his name.
Bitch. I drink people.
Now, maybe Carlisle locked her up until she was in control of herself, but that's never suggested in the book or movie, so it's speculative at best. So they're slaves to their instincts, but they're also perfectly content with laying low and not giving into their bloodlust. At no point do I believe that any of these newborns are on the verge of losing control. Meyer told us one rule, then showed us another. Which leads me to another question about newborns. How smart are they really? The movie doesn't touch on this point, but the book gives really mixed messages on how well newborns can plan. And for the record, Riley was at least established as having been a vampire for about a year, so he's exempt from this. On one hand, Jasper says that newborns are predictable because they're slaves to their instincts, while at the same time saying this.
Never go for the obvious kill. They'll be expecting that. And you will lose.
How wild are newborns supposed to be? Can they be tactical? Do all their plans just involve swarming enemies? How can they be predictable while also setting up traps? This isn't a good model for a type of enemy. This is Meyer throwing a few random ingredients from the back of her fridge into a pot and mixing it all together. She thinks she's giving us a souffle, but she's actually making dwarven bread. But again, trying to be fair, I think I see what Meyer was going for. She wanted her newborns to be otherwise normal vampires that were prone to bouts of insane bloodlust. They'd have trouble controlling their urges to go out and attack prey, but would only sometimes give in. This is a very common design choice for many fantasy series with vampires. The problem Meyer had is that she never really defines her characters, her world, or the elements within it, so you don't get a solid understanding about who and what things are supposed to be. For example, take the Hellsing Ultimate series. If you haven't seen it, or if you've only seen the abridged series, which is amazing, go watch it, then you might not understand how vampires sire other vampires. Why do so many of them wind up as ghouls instead of new vampires? The answer is actually provided at the very beginning of the story. If one vampire bites someone of the opposite sex, and that person is virgin, they turn into a vampire. If they're not a virgin, they become a ghoul and are often used as food or as evil minions. This little rule is short and simple, but still gets plenty of reference because it's applied consistently. Meyer didn't set up her world consistently. The newborn's description and Rosalie's backstory sound like they were written in two separate drafts. When plotting out your story, your characters, your magic system, your story's universe, whatever, doesn't matter, the best thing you can do is nitpick the hell out of it. Or, barring that, have beta readers do it for you. If someone reads your first draft and says, "This doesn't make sense," you should at least consider what they have to say. Refusing to check your own work is what results in underdeveloped trash like this. As for the fight scene itself, it has a few shots that I like, but by and large, it only captured my attention because I was just glad to have something different after watching mopey cardboard cutouts being dramatic at each other for an hour and a half. This fight scene isn't helped by underwhelming choreography or the fact that you have to do research to know who any of the wolves are, aside from Jacob or Sam. At one point, Emmett saves this one wolf, then they kinda have a moment, and it's framed like these two are reconciling their differences. While that's all fine and good in a general sense, the moment is kinda hollow because I have no idea who this wolf is. Hell, I barely have a grasp on Emmett's character. For all I know, this is an actual wolf that got lost in the woods and wandered into the battle. The entire experience is so underwhelming because I don't care about any of the characters on screen. They're so underdeveloped, even this far into the third movie, that I can barely tell some of them apart. Unfortunately, there seems to be a gargantuan flaw in the plan to hide Bella. Vicky swung by the battle, probably to make sure Bella was killed, but didn't find her there. She then took off running for the mountains, right for Bella and Edward, and all for one simple reason.
She knew we weren't there, but she caught my scent. She knew you'd be with me.
This is such an obvious flaw in their plan, it sounds like a poorly timed joke. The Cullens took all these precautions to stop the newborns from following Bella's scent, only to have Vicky follow Ed's scent instead. This is like barricading all the windows in your house while leaving the front door open and marking it with landing strips. Hiding Bella and ambushing the newborns was a fine plan, but little details like this matter. If you don't think through obvious lapses in judgment like this, then your writing looks sloppy. It's kind of hilarious that it would have made sense within the plot if Jacob had carried Ed up the mountain too. You'd fix a blatant oversight, and give the yaoi fangirl something to scream about.
Stop squealing every time a penis walks on the screen, Jesus!
You know what would have been more effective? Putting Bella on a bus out of town. If Teen Wolf's natural musk is enough to block Bella's odor, then think about what they could accomplish with a car park full of diesel fumes. So Vicky and Riley finally show up, with Ed reading both of their minds to try to split them apart.
I can read her mind, so I know what she thinks of you.
He's lying.
She only created you and this army to avenge her true mate, James. It's the only thing she cares about.
Vicky was just using Riley to kill Bella to get revenge, manipulating him to avenge James, the Hemsworth wannabe from the first story. She'll probably just kill Riley once this fight's over. And that right there could have been a decent motivation for a basic villain. But Vicky is one of the least developed characters I've ever come across in fiction. The movies, especially Eclipse, did a little bit to actually give her screen time and a little bit of personality, but the books robbed Vicky of any chance to display any kind of character. Remember, she hasn't even been seen since 2/3 of the way through the first book, and now she shows up with about 100 pages to go, and, spoiler warning, she'll be dead by the end of the chapter. I can't think of any other villain that was effectively written in the same style that Meyer was going for. At least Kaiser Soze lived up to his reputation. And remember the old motivational picture, just because you're unique doesn't mean you're useful. Victoria was supposed to be this shadowy figure just lurking around the corner, waiting for a chance to kill Bella, but somehow managing to mess that up at every turn. She was barely more than a footnote during New Moon, but the book kept treating her like this imminent threat. This is a villain who's supposed to be mysterious, but she pops out of nowhere with no build-up, and her death was so abrupt it's almost an anticlimax.
Ha! It was I all along! Alright, I'll start with the obvious.
Show don't tell is a cornerstone rule in writing for a reason. If you spend 2 whole books telling me about someone, but you do nothing to substantiate your claims, then the educated reader will think you're wasting their time. However, if you had a scene, just one single scene, where Victoria corners Bella in the woods, maybe even kills someone in front of her, she would have had a much stronger presence. It also would have made this line from New Moon make sense.
She's fast. You don't know how fast she is.
Picture this. Bella goes into the woods to talk with Harry, maybe something about Jacob or her dad, when they get jumped by Victoria. Harry tries to defend Bella, but Victoria bats him aside like he's nothing, which kills him. Victoria toys with Bella for a bit, maybe she knows the Cullens are gone, and she's about to get her revenge, when Sam and the wolves show up at the last second. With a relatively minor change, several characters suddenly look better. Harry looks brave, Victoria looks dangerous, even Sam and his pack get a little clout. Hell, Bella might even look sympathetic as long as the scene was framed correctly. If you want to find anything substantial about Vicky, you pretty much need to find an outside source like a wiki page, because the books do nothing to describe her. Keeping her out of all the scenes until now was a tremendous mistake. Now, not understanding enemies can make them intimidating if done correctly. Take a slasher movie villain like Jason or Michael Myers. They're menacing, dangerous opponents. Want to know how I can tell? Because they show up! They actually got a little bit of definition, and we saw them kill and terrorize people. The books gave so little about Vicky to work with that the screenwriter pretty much had to make stuff up to fill time. I can list tertiary characters with more development than Victoria.
Hello!
Hey, dude, you're driving a limo now. That's awesome.
I've moved up in the world.
She gets so little development that I bet a good number of you don't know that she actually has a super special vampire power. Vampire powers in the Twilight universe have no sense of balance and are so ridiculous that they probably deserve their own video, but I'll keep it short for now. We've seen things like Ed's telepathy, Jane's pain stare, Alice's ability to read ahead in the script, and they even include one vampire named Marcus who can psychically sense relationships between people. I promise I'm not making that up. Victoria's power isn't like those and is only something I can describe as a cheap cop-out that Meyer probably felt she had to retcon in order for the story to make sense in her mind. You see, Victoria's super special vampire power is having the instinctive knowledge of when to run away. Unlike everything else they've done with Victoria's character though, this does get mentioned in the book, though the movie cuts it out. While trying to goad Vicky into a fight, Ed gloats about killing James and says, "You can always run later. Plenty of time for that. It's what you do, isn't it? It's why James kept you around. Useful if you like to play deadly games. A partner with an uncanny instinct for escaping." A reveal at the end of the story can work, but this feels tacked on, like Victoria was just given a power out of obligation. Like, is this really some necessary element in Meyer's universe? That all vampires have some unique power that belongs to only them? Some abilities are fine, but Meyer doesn't have the talent to actually create enough unique powers and runs out of steam after 3 ideas. That's why one vampire has powers like being really, really attractive if they just concentrate hard enough. Again, I am not making that up. Vicky's power is more or less the same base level fight or flight instinct most humans experience. I'm not even sure why she needed a special vampire power. Not every single one has one. Carlisle doesn't. According to Wikipedia, his only passive talent is being compassionate, which lets him avoid succumbing to his bloodlust. Other vampires get powers like generating electricity along their skin. Vicky's power is apparently giving into her fear and escaping.
Run, bitch! Run!
Here's what I want to know. If Vicky was only concerned with getting revenge by killing Bella to hurt Ed, then why not teach Riley how to use a sniper rifle? He's had about a year to practice. Or stalk and turn a Delta Force sniper, or someone like that. Ed's power doesn't seem to work outside of a short range, like maybe a few hundred feet at the absolute most. And Alice couldn't see that Vicky had made an army in Seattle, so both of their powers would be countered with a little bit of range from an unknown shooter. I mean, I'm sure Meyer would do something to Deus Ex Machina Bella out of the situation, but I'm standing by this. So the secondary climax happens and is over in under 3 minutes. Ed gets trapped by Riley and Vicky working together, but Bella has a moment and uses a dull rock to cut open a blood pack from under her sleeve, somehow not even tearing her shirt in the process. I guess this is supposed to be a reference to the third wife from the Quileute story, but the movie doesn't try to provide any kind of link back to that scene. No flashbacks or anything. It doesn't feel like Bella learned a lesson or took inspiration from someone else. The connection to the third wife's actions feel more like a coincidence. Bella never reflects on anything that's happened before, even though there's a very clear link to past events. It feels so out of place that the connection comes off as unintentional. So the fight goes well, and Seth comes in and finishes off Riley off-screen. Vicky goes all for broke, but Ed finishes her off with a deadly technique called the Vicky-A decapitation. And despite needing to build a funeral pyre for James in the first movie, Vicky just ignites from a lighter like all her clothes were soaked in gasoline. Maybe her special vampire power was actually being especially flammable. Ed and Bella make their way back to the field, where Riley's runaways are already on fire, except for Bree, who has surrendered, and this ballsy weirdo who charges into battle despite being outnumbered 12 to 1. However, he does get a lucky hit in, and Jacob gets hurt.
Jacob? Oh my god, who the hell cares?
The pack carries their injured friend back to the reservation, while Jake salutes Wakanda.
Wakanda forever!
Meanwhile, representatives of the Vampire Mafia show up, including Dakota Fanning.
It's not often we're rendered unnecessary.
I could use that one line to describe more than half the cast in this series. But then we get Fanning's almost singular contribution to this entire movie. She's here to kill young Bree, most likely to silence her to prevent the Volturi's complicity with Victoria's plans coming to light. And the Cullens just stand by and let an innocent girl get murdered again, but in regards to storytelling, that's not a bad thing. In one quick scene, we get an understanding of how powerful the Vampire Mafia is supposed to be. Even with Jane's pain power, the Cullens probably could have overpowered the four of them. They certainly have numbers on their side, and a blitz attack would catch them off guard. Take out Jane and they get the advantage. And yet they don't, because doing so would incur the wrath of the rest of the Volturi. In fact, the wrath of the Volturi is more or less what drives some of the plot in Breaking Dawn, so the fear does have some weight behind it. Granted, the book still gives mixed messages about the Volturi, their motives, or even how effective they are as a group, some of which I've already brought up, but this little moment, taken by itself, does work. So Jacob gets all his bones set in place by Carlisle, and Bella goes to check on him. They talk for a bit, but the whole thing can be summed up with Bella getting tricked into thinking she loves Jacob, and Jacob saying he's not giving up on Bella, even if she decomposes into a vampire.
But I'll always be waiting.
Till my heart stops beating.
Maybe even then.
Also, he demonstrates that he learned nothing and is probably incapable of redemption.
It wasn't easy making you admit your feelings for me.
One more thing the movie cut was the epilogue, in which Meyer finally broke away from Bella's inner monologue and showed things from Jacob's inner monologue. He freaked out when Bella sent him a wedding invitation, kind of salting the wound there. Then he ran into the night. It could have been a touching moment of inner conflict if that wasn't exactly what we'd seen Jacob doing for the entire run of the book. Instead, the movie just gives us one final scene of Ed and Bella sitting in a field, discussing their future, trying to sum up the point of the story, and getting it wrong.
You're trying to make everyone else happy. But you're already giving away too much.
You're wrong.
Yes, Bella, he is wrong. Edward's premise relies on the idea that Bella ever does anything in the first place. Within the context of this book, she's taken almost no independent action of her own. This is a story told from the point of view of a MacGuffin. Bella is a social doormat. She does very little to actively support others and just goes along with whatever they want. The most she really does for herself is argue against Ed kidnapping her and then running off to go see Jacob once. And this ties back to my rant about Bella being a passive character. She spent this entire story reacting to various things around her while other characters stepped up and took action. Bella may have wanted both guys in her life to be happy, but she put almost no effort into actually making them happy. Granted, they both wanted her romantically, so there was only so much she could reasonably do, short of bigamy, but this is giving her credit for something she hasn't done. Also, keep in mind the utter lack of effort in making all her human friends happy, making the rest of the Cullens happy, or making her parents happy. True, Charlie doesn't deserve joy in his life after this book, but my point stands. This also ties into how Bella saw herself in the book, split between two boys and struggling to make them happy. It had not been Edward and Jacob that I'd been trying to force together, it was the two parts of myself, Edward's Bella and Jacob's Bella, but they could not exist together, and I never should have tried. Bella's under the delusion that she's a complex character and mistakenly believes that she takes on different traits depending upon who she's hanging around. However, we rarely see any meaningful distinction in her character when interacting with Ed or Jacob, certainly not at the point where she's created any kind of cognitive dissonance within herself. The character she exudes when she's alone with either one of these guys is fundamentally the same. At most, she's a little more relaxed around Jacob and more lovey-dovey around Ed, but there's no reason why these emotions can't overlap. Bella thinks she's arguing over being in a romantic relationship with both of these guys while never making any meaningful steps to be with Jacob. Even after being tricked into kissing Jake and then seeing him after the battle to say that she does love him, Bella still goes right back to Ed to plan their wedding as if nothing happened. Her argument comes down to reacting differently around the guys on an unconscious level, which means she's not actually fighting with herself. She's fighting an internalized perception of what she thinks she is, and her perception is wrong. She thinks she's trying to make everyone happy, but it sounds more like she wants both boys in a given capacity, Ed as a husband and Jake as a close buddy. That makes her sound dependent and clingy, not altruistic. Bella is shallow and one-dimensional. She's not someone to idolize, she's someone to pity. And with that final monologue out of the way, we come to the best part of the movie. The credits. For an added experience, mute the movie and enjoy the silence. After that movie, this is 8.5 minutes of bliss. The sheer audacity Stephenie Meyer had to even put pen to paper appalls me. The movie was a mess of storytelling with the kind of sluggish pacing normally reserved for a high school chemistry class. Hopefully you got an understanding of how bad it was through some of the clips shown, as drawn out as they were. The book was even worse, with scenes that went nowhere, ham-fisted character backgrounds that told you everything but made sure to leave you out of the moment, and a plot that constantly teased you in the distance, only to run away as soon as you glanced at it, constantly mocking you out of reach. It was fine enough as an adaptation, thanks in large part to screenwriter Melissa Rosenberg doing a major pass job on the entire project. But between weak directing, limp world building, and acting so lifeless that it has to be intentional, I can't think of any reason to watch this nonsense outside of riffing on it with friends. The book is just a test in masochism, and thinking about the unironic praise the Twilight series used to get will turn any self-respecting reader into a nihilist.